The wedding reception was meant to be a joyous celebration, but it quickly descended into chaos when my mother-in-law, Sylvia, found out that I was pregnant before the marriage. I could see her expression shift, her eyes narrowed, and a chill filled the air as she rose from her seat. In a swift burst of rage, she stormed toward me, and in front of our guests, she didn't just raise her voice, she grabbed the neckline of my dress and tore it apart. Gasps echoed throughout the room, and whispers of shock spread like wildfire. I stood there, frozen in humiliation, as the sound of ripping fabric resonated in my ears. Everyone expected my husband to come to my defense, to show that I was part of his family despite his mother's wrath. But he didn't move. He merely stared at me, his expression blank, offering no words of support or gestures of reassurance. At that moment, I felt utterly alone, shamed, and exposed in front of a crowd. Even his father remained silent, watching as if he were just an onlooker. Little did they know that a storm was brewing, and I was ready to fight back. My name is Hannah, and I want to share my story, one filled with heartbreak and betrayal, but also with hope and the discovery of inner strength. Growing up wasn't easy. After my parents passed away, my grandparents took me in and did their best, but life was always a struggle. I learned early on that I had to fight for everything I desired. I focused intently on my studies, determined to forge a better life for myself. I had once dreamed of becoming an accountant, but I ultimately pursued a career as a software developer, hoping it would provide the financial security I craved. By my late 20s, I secured a decent job at a tech firm in a small town in Ohio, feeling like I was finally on the path to a stable future. That's when I met Robert Hastings, a man who seemed to embody everything I had ever hoped for. He was charming and confident, and came from a wealthy family that owned several businesses. Our romance ignited quickly, sweeping me off my feet and making me believe I had finally found a place where I belonged. Everything changed when I discovered I was pregnant. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, terror mingled with excitement, and I thought Robert would share in my joy. I still remember the day I revealed the news. We were sitting in my modest apartment, and my heart raced as I finally blurted it out, "Robert, I have something important to tell you. I'm pregnant." His reaction was not what I had anticipated. Instead of joy, his face drained of color, and he began pacing the room in panic. "How could this happen? I'm not ready to be a father," he shouted, his voice echoing with fear. My heart sank, but I tried to remain calm. "We can figure it out together," I reassured him, hoping to soothe his distress. After a long silence, he finally calmed down and, to my relief, agreed to marry me. But that was before Sylvia found out. Sylvia Hastings was a woman used to getting her way. She ran her family like a business, cold, calculated, and ruthless. When she discovered I was pregnant, her fury was palpable. I will never forget the moment she confronted Robert about me. "She's a nobody," Sylvia spat, her words dripping with contempt. "You can't marry her, think of our family's reputation." Despite Robert's attempts to calm her, Sylvia made it clear that I would never be accepted into their family. Yet Robert, ever the charmer, assured me that everything would be fine and that we would go ahead with the wedding. I should have seen the warning signs. On the day of the wedding, instead of a joyous celebration, I felt like I was marching into battle. The ceremony went smoothly, but the reception revealed the harsh truth. As we greeted our guests, Sylvia's icy gaze locked onto me. Before I could react, she stepped forward and tore my dress apart, shouting, "You think you can trap my son with this baby? You will never be part of this family." The silence that followed was deafening. Guests stared in horror as I desperately tried to hold the torn fabric together, my cheeks burning with shame. But the most devastating part was Robert's silence, his unwillingness to stand up for me. He looked away, treating me like a mere stranger. After the wedding, I moved into the Hastings estate, a grand mansion that felt more like a prison than a home. Robert's demeanor shifted almost overnight, He became distant, hiding behind the weight of his family's expectations. Sylvia's cruelty intensified, belittling me at every turn and calling me a gold digger, even questioning the paternity of my child. "Maybe you've been lying about this baby all along," she would hiss, her voice laced with venom. With each passing day, I felt increasingly isolated, yet I held on to the hope that somehow Robert would change. It wasn't until I gave birth to my son, Jacob, that I realized how trapped I truly was. As I held him in my arms, I knew I needed to find a way out. That's when Mark and Laura, friends I had met at a local community group, entered my life. Mark was a kind-hearted man in his early 40s, living with a limp from an old injury, and Laura, his sister, worked as a nurse's aide. They became my lifeline, offering support when I had none. "Hannah, you're stronger than you think," Mark would say whenever I felt overwhelmed. "You can build your own family. You don't need to rely on them." Their words ignited a flicker of hope within me. I began to envision a life free from Sylvia's oppressive influence. But just when I thought I could start to rebuild, Sylvia escalated her attacks. One evening, I overheard her telling Robert, "You need to put your foot down, or you'll lose everything. She'll take this baby and ruin your life." Robert's reply stunned me. "I don't know what to do, Mom. What am I supposed to do?" In that moment, I knew I had to protect Jacob. If I didn't act, Sylvia would take everything from me. With Mark and Laura's help, I started gathering evidence, documenting every insult, every threat, and every attempt to undermine my role as a mother. When the day of the custody hearing arrived, I was terrified. Sylvia, impeccably dressed, glared at me as if she had already won. But I stood my ground, presenting my case with all the strength I had fought so hard to discover. When the judge announced his decision, granting me full custody of Jacob, I felt the chains of my entrapment finally break. "This isn't over," Sylvia snarled as we left the courtroom. "Maybe not," I replied, holding my son close. "But I will always fight for him." In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I found a small house filled with laughter and love, watching Jacob grow stronger every day. With Mark and Laura by my side, I created a new family built on support and trust. No longer merely surviving, I was thriving. For the first time, I felt truly free. Sylvia may have tried to destroy me, but she underestimated one vital thing. I was a fighter, and I would always protect what was mine. Yet I knew her threats were far from over. Even after winning custody, I sensed she wouldn't let me live in peace. There were whispers that she was searching for ways to undermine the court's decision. "She's not going to give up," Mark warned me one day over coffee, concern etched across his face. "You need to stay vigilant." One evening, while I was putting Jacob to bed, there was a loud knock on the door. Cautiously, I opened it to find two uniformed officers standing on my porch. We need to talk," one said seriously. "We received a report that you're unfit to care for your son." My heart dropped. "What? That's a lie." I started, but then I stopped mid-sentence. Of course, this was Sylvia's doing, her underhanded attempt to take Jacob from me. We need to look around," the officer said gently, though I could see the suspicion in his eyes. I knew Sylvia was trying to portray me as an unstable, negligent mother, and if I wasn't careful, she could succeed. "Go ahead," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. "You won't find anything." They moved through the house, checking every room while I stood anxiously, my stomach churning. When they finished, the officer nodded. "Everything seems fine here. But I suggest you be cautious. False reports like this can sometimes escalate." I nodded, but inside I was seething. Sylvia had crossed a line, and if I didn't act, she would keep pushing until she found a way to destroy me. The very next day, I called Mark and Laura. "We need to talk," I said urgently. They came over right away, and we sat around my small kitchen table, brainstorming how to combat Sylvia's relentless attacks. "We need to document everything," Laura suggested. "Every time she tries to undermine you, we need to have proof." I felt a spark of hope ignite within me. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. With their help, I began to build a strategy, documenting every encounter with Sylvia and collecting evidence that would stand in court. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew I had to protect my son, no matter the cost. Sylvia would not take him away from me. Months passed, and tensions grew as Sylvia escalated her tactics, using every opportunity to cast doubt on my parenting abilities. The culmination came when I received a call from her lawyer, demanding I attend a mediation session. "She wants to negotiate custody," the lawyer said coldly. I knew this was just another ploy to intimidate me, but I steeled myself for the fight ahead. Mark and Laura encouraged me to stand strong. "You can do this, Hannah. You have every right to protect Jacob," Laura said firmly. On the day of the session, Sylvia sat across from me, her expression smug. But I felt different, empowered and resolute. I presented my case clearly, detailing the ways she had tried to manipulate the situation. The mediator listened attentively, and as the session progressed, I could see doubt creeping into Sylvia's demeanor. By the end, it was clear to everyone that I would not back down. The mediator suggested we take a break, allowing us to cool off. I stepped outside for fresh air, my heart racing, but I felt a newfound strength. I was not that scared girl from before. I was a mother willing to do anything to protect my child. A few weeks later, the ruling came through joint custody with specific stipulations. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a significant step in the right direction. As I left the courtroom, I felt lighter, and more confident than I had in years. While Sylvia would always be a presence in our lives, I now had the tools to fight back. I would make sure that Jacob grew up knowing he was loved and supported. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, savoring every moment with Jacob. We made new memories, playing in the park, baking cookies, and reading stories before bed. I found strength in those little things, reminding myself that I was a survivor. In time, I built a new life for Jacob and me, filled with love, laughter, and hope. I made new friends, and my relationship with Mark and Laura blossomed into a supportive bond that felt like family. As I watched Jacob thrive, I realized that I had triumphed over adversity and taken control of my life. Though Sylvia would always be lurking in the shadows, I refused to let her fear dictate my happiness. I knew I would protect my son at all costs. Life may have thrown curveballs my way, but I had learned to swing back with strength and resilience.